Under bright studio lights, the air felt unusually heavy. The cameras were rolling, the audience clapping, and the view's host smiled wide for the opening shot. But behind those smiles, tension quietly brewed. Jonathan Roumie sat calmly at the far end of the table, dressed modestly in a dark jacket and white shirt, his demeanor peaceful but focused. He wasn't there to promote a film this time. He was there to talk about something deeper, something the show wasn't ready for. The segment began light, the hosts joking about the chosen and his portrayal of Jesus. But then the tone shifted. One of the co-hosts leaned in, smirking slightly. "So, Jonathan," she said, "you really believe all that? I mean, walking on water, resurrection, literal miracles." The audience chuckled softly, unsure if they were supposed to. The camera cut to Jonathan. His hands were folded, his voice calm. "Yes," he said simply. "Because faith isn't about seeing first, it's about trusting first." The laughter stopped. You could feel the silence stretch, uncomfortable, electric. Another host jumped in. "But don't you think that kind of thinking is dangerous in today's world? We have science, progress, people need facts, not feelings." Jonathan turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers, not with challenge, but compassion. "Science tells us how things work," he said softly. "Faith tells us why." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back clapped once before realizing they were the only one. The hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the soundbite they expected. The lead host laughed awkwardly. "You're saying you'd put belief over evidence." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I'm saying belief is evidence, when it transforms your heart. When you see forgiveness where hate used to be, when someone finds peace after loss, that's as real as any experiment." A camera operator swallowed hard, the lens slightly trembling. It wasn't the typical celebrity interview anymore. The host who started the question leaned back, crossing her arms. "So, what? You think people who don't believe are lost?" Jonathan shook his head immediately. "No," he said gently. "I think they are searching. The same way I was. The same way all of us are." For a moment, there was no comeback. No laughter track. Just a strange, heavy stillness. The control room whispered frantically in earpieces. "Cut to commercial," someone hissed. "Cut, now." But the producers didn't. Because everyone knew, something real was happening. Jonathan sat quietly, his words echoing in the space. You could feel the weight of truth settle over the set like dust in sunlight. He looked at the hosts again, his expression warm, steady. "You asked me if I really believe. I do. Because I've seen what happens when people finally let love in." The red studio light blinked, signaling a new segment, but no one moved. The lead host cleared her throat. "We'll, take a quick break." The audience exhaled collectively, unsure what they'd just witnessed. But Jonathan just smiled softly, folded his hands, and whispered a quiet prayer under his breath, unaware that those few minutes had already gone viral before the commercial even began. The silence, for once, spoke louder than the show. The commercial break should have given everyone time to reset, to shake off whatever strange spell had fallen over the studio. But it didn't. The hosts gathered around their producer, whispering, faces tight with confusion and pride. Jonathan sat alone at the table, head bowed slightly, not in exhaustion, but in peace. When the cameras came back, the audience applauded on cue, but the energy was different now, uneasy, curious. The lead host smiled too widely. "We're back with Jonathan Roumie," she said. "You may know him as Jesus from The Chosen, and as you just saw, he's not afraid to talk faith." Her tone carried that fake cheer people use when they're trying to regain control. Jonathan smiled politely. "Thank you for having me." The second host leaned forward again, her voice sharper this time. "So, Jonathan, before the break, you said you've seen what happens when people let love in. But what about people who don't? Are you saying everyone needs to follow your Jesus to be good?" Jonathan paused. "I think everyone has the spark of goodness inside them," he said slowly. "But that spark needs something greater to ignite it. We can do good things on our own. But true transformation, that comes from grace." A murmur moved through the audience. Some nodded. Some frowned. Another host cut in, crossing her legs with a snap. "Grace is fine, but religion has caused wars, division, hate. Isn't it dangerous to preach one version of truth?" Jonathan's voice stayed calm, but something deeper flickered behind his eyes. "Religion doesn't start wars," he said. "Pride does. Power does. When faith becomes a weapon instead of a bridge, it's no longer faith." The crowd erupted in quiet applause. The lead host shot a quick look to the producer booth, a silent warning to cut that energy off. "Let's be honest," another co-host said, forcing a laugh. "You play Jesus. People see you as him. Don't you worry about that going to your head." Jonathan chuckled softly. "It's a daily reminder of how small I am. Playing him doesn't make me holy, it makes me accountable." The room went still again. That line hit deeper than anyone expected. Then came the jab, the one that crossed the line. "So, if Jesus were here today," one of the hosts asked with a smirk, "what would he say about Hollywood actors pretending to be him while living in mansions?" The audience gasped. A few even booed. Jonathan didn't flinch. His eyes softened. "He'd probably remind me that even in comfort, a heart can still be restless. And he'd ask me what I'm doing with what I've been given." That answer hit harder than any argument could. The silence that followed was deafening. The camera slowly zoomed in on Jonathan's face. You could see something behind his cam, not arrogance, not defensiveness, but sorrow. Compassion. He looked around the table, meeting each host's gaze. "I didn't come here to argue," he said quietly. "I came to share hope. Because the world doesn't need more debates. It needs reminders that love still wins." One host shifted uncomfortably. "So, you're saying we're lost?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "I'm saying we're loved. Even when we don't know it yet." The audience fell completely silent. No laughter, no cue cards, just stillness. In the control room, a producer whispered, "This is gold. Don't cut it." Another voice whispered back, "This is chaos. Do it now." But no one did. For the first time in years, The View, a show built on noise, had been silenced by grace. And Jonathan didn't even raise his voice. The studio fell into a stillness that felt almost unnatural for television. No one dared to speak first. The moment hung heavy, and in that pause, Jonathan leaned forward. His voice was steady, but you could feel the storm beneath it. "I think," he began slowly, "what's really happening here isn't about politics or entertainment. It's about how uncomfortable people become when someone refuses to fit inside their boxes." Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "And what box are you in, Jonathan?" He smiled faintly. "None. That's the point." A murmur rippled across the studio audience. The camera cut to Joy, who gave a forced laugh, but her eyes were sharp. "So, what? You're saying we're attacking your faith? That's not what we do here." Jonathan's tone didn't waver. "Then why does it feel like believing in something deeper, something bigger than ratings, is suddenly controversial?" A few people clapped. Just a few. But it was enough. He didn't let the moment slip. He leaned closer, his expression serious, voice lowering until it felt like he was talking directly to the viewers at home. "When we filmed The Chosen, I wasn't just playing Jesus. I was playing the idea of grace in a world that's forgotten what that word even means. And grace," he paused, "isn't trendy. It's costly. It means forgiving people who mock you, listening when you'd rather shout, standing up for love when everyone else is tearing each other apart on television." The crowd was silent. Sunny shifted in her chair. "But Jonathan, this is The View. People come here for opinions, sometimes strong ones." He nodded. "Opinions are fine. But there's a difference between having a voice and using it to drown everyone else's out." The studio lights seemed to dim, or maybe it was just the gravity of what he was saying. "Do you know what I've seen on set?" he continued. "I've seen crew members cry after filming scenes of compassion because they realized they hadn't shown any to themselves in years. I've seen people come back to faith, not religion, but faith, because for the first time, someone didn't argue them into it. They loved them into it." Joy looked down, fingers tapping her note cards. "You really believe love can fix all this?" He smiled softly. "I don't think it can fix everything, but it's the only thing that doesn't make it worse." The words landed like a slow echo. Whoopi exhaled deeply, trying to regain control of the segment. "All right, Jonathan," she said with a grin that couldn't quite mask her respect. "You've got the floor today, huh?" He chuckled lightly. "I didn't ask for it. It just felt necessary." The audience clapped this time, louder, fuller. But he wasn't finished. He looked toward the camera again, his tone quiet but unshakably firm. "Every day, people tune into shows like this to watch the latest argument, the newest scandal, the next person to cancel. But maybe, just maybe, we're starving for something different. Not outrage, not applause, but meaning." The producer signaled the crew to cut to commercial, but the hosts' mics were still live. Jonathan's last words slipped through before the fade-out. Meaning doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from remembering who you are when the world forgets what truth sounds like. Then silence. Even after the feed went dark, no one spoke. For 16 minutes, Jonathan Roumie had said what no one dared to say on live television, and somehow, the noise stopped. When the cameras finally cut back, the atmosphere was different. The host smiled, but it wasn't the rehearsed, media-trained kind of smile. It was something quieter. Real. Jonathan sat still, his hands folded on the table. No smugness. No victory lap. Just a calm that seemed almost out of place in the chaos of daytime television. Whoopi looked at him for a long second before saying, softly, "You know, we've had a lot of guests on this show. Politicians. Actors. Activists. But I don't think anyone's ever made us stop." Jonathan laughed gently. Maybe that's the problem with television. We forget that silence can say something too. The audience chuckled, but there was weight in his words, something that hung in the air like incense. Joy nodded slowly. "You didn't just shut down the table, Jonathan. You made people feel something. That doesn't happen often." He smiled. "Feeling isn't weakness, Joy. It's what makes us human." The crowd applauded, louder this time. Not because he'd out-argued anyone, but because he'd reminded them why it even mattered to talk at all. When the segment ended, the music played, and the hosts went through the motions. But when the cameras finally cut to commercial, no one moved. Jonathan looked down at his hands for a moment, then up at the studio lights. He seemed somewhere else, half in this world, half in one much larger. A young production assistant, probably no older than 22, walked up nervously. "Mr. Roumie," she said softly. "That was incredible. My mom's been struggling with faith for years. I think she's gonna watch that clip, Anne." Jonathan interrupted with a smile. "Then tell her I said hi. And tell her she's not alone." She nodded, tears in her eyes. As he stood to leave, Whoopi called after him. "Jonathan, one question before you go." He turned back, curious. "Do you think people will actually listen?" He paused for a long moment before answering. "If they are ready to." And with that, he walked off set, quietly, like a man stepping out of a storm. Outside the studio, the afternoon light hit his face. The city buzzed around him, sirens, honking cars, people rushing by, but somehow, everything felt still. He took a breath. Deep. Centered. A text lit up his phone. "You're trending." He smiled faintly. "That's not the point," he whispered. But still, he checked. The clip was everywhere. Jonathan Roumie shuts down the view for 16 minutes. Millions of views within hours. Thousands of comments. Some praising. Some mocking. Some confused. But buried between the noise was something else. Messages from people who said they'd cried. That they'd prayed for the first time in years. That they'd finally felt something real again. He scrolled for a while, then locked his phone and slipped it into his pocket. It wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about planting a seed in a room full of noise, and trusting it might grow somewhere unseen. That night, back in his apartment, Jonathan sat by the window, city lights flickering outside. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for himself, but for everyone who'd heard him that day. "God, let them feel you in the silence." He leaned back, eyes closing, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension. No noise. No performance. Just peace. The next morning, headlines screamed his name. Some called it the boldest interview of the year. Others called it arrogance disguised as humility. But Jonathan didn't read them. He was already back on set, costume on, cameras rolling, walking barefoot across the sand under a sun that looked like fire. "Action," someone called. He looked up, and for a brief moment, he wasn't acting. He was just being. The words he'd said on The View echoed faintly in his mind. Meaning doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from remembering who you are when the world forgets what truth sounds like. He smiled. And as the camera rolled, Jonathan Roumie began to speak, not as a man defending faith, but as someone who'd already lived it. The scene would later go viral. The interview would become a reference point. But none of that mattered. Because for 16 minutes on live television, the noise stopped. And in that silence, truth finally had a voice.